Alright, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all the honor, the praise, glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachakodash. Double honors to the elders and apostles, great millstone, who well, peace, salutations to the elect, scattered abroad. Alright, this is Brother Barbazal here with a quick lesson. And Lord willing, is edifying. So today, I wanted to get into a lesson through the Spirit, just going into, the recent situation that happened with the IUIC. It's of course the video has been circulating around brothers, and in case brothers didn't know, a situation that happened with the IUIC. They ended up going out there, preaching in Kenya, and things took, things didn't go too well. Okay, and that's what happens when you have a group of ultimately overzealous, Israelites that, false prophets, steering away from the truth. This is what it leads to. Okay, and the IUIC has been known to, do this type of stuff. Like the church blitzes and things of that nature. They're always wrapped up in stuff like this, which. If anything, you should know better than trying to, do that in a third world country, in a country that, because Kenya is ultimately, Hamites dwell there, right? Of course, they have, your speckled birds among them, right? Israelites, of course, as we know that the Israelites is scattered all throughout the four corners of the earth, right? But it's not wise to go to a country like that to go out and teach, man. All right, especially when they're trying to get you off the street corners, and these guys, which I'm assuming they were, the police. They're telling you to, they're telling you to leave, and you choose not to, right? Scriptures go into agree with thine adversary quickly, which we'll get into it. All right. But, the first scripture I wanted to get into is, of course, let's get Luke 14 and 23. It says, and the Lord said unto the servant, go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in that my house may be filled. Right? Now, with that being said, all right, it's, we still got to use wisdom. Okay? You can't just go out and do whatever you please. You're supposed to go out and teach and, try not to cause any conflict or cause any problems, right? Just doing like a church blitz is unwise. Going to, just traveling around the world to preach the word in all these different, countries is not a wise thing to do, which we know that, IUIC obviously, teaches, false doctrine, but it ultimately, them doing that, it gives, these different nations and different, Esau, Edom, more ammo to justify, coming down with that great wrath. Okay. So when we go out there, we're not supposed to go out there and, church. No, just go out and preach. All right. Find a street corner. All right. Go out somewhere in the public, in the public. All right. Chief place of concourse, whatever the case may be. All right. And preach. Same thing like over here, right? We don't recommend brothers to, preach in the hood, right? Because, it's all type of problems that can happen with that. Okay. And, just go out and teach, right? Chief place of concourse, right? Public area, all right, where, decent amount of traffic, and preach, a relatively, safe area, not too much problems going on. Because you got to understand that us going out there, all right, and especially, because, we have the internet, right? This word is going to reach the elect, Okay, us going out. All right, because you got to remember too. All right, this word is started in Harlem, New York. And eventually, it started expanding. Especially once the internet hit. All right, and then brothers began preaching all throughout the U.S. and it expanded. That way. It expanded out the country that way. Okay, which that's a tool that the Lord is having the prophets use. We don't have to go out like the prophets of old and go out to these different lands and preach the word, right? We got everything we need, here, right, in Babylon, right? As long as we got the highways and hedges, as long as you got we got the cameras, we got the internet, all right, and that's all we need, all right. So let's get the next scripture, Matthew 5:25. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. You see, this ain't only, and this could be used in that context as well. All right, because even though obviously Esau's our main adversary, this could go, you know, this can be extended to the heathen nations as well. Okay, because ultimately, all the heathen nations is our adversaries as well. Okay, they're our enemies as well. All right, but that whole thing was just unwise, right? Here you are, you're preaching, really in a place that you have no business preaching at. All right, and then when they telling you to go with straps and things of that nature, right? You don't choose to move until they start getting violent, right? Throwing out tear gas, grenades, and they and hey, and I was watching the Apostle Tahar's video. He said, man, they're lucky that they ain't start shooting. You know, pretty much put them to death. All right, because these other countries, they don't play. All right, it's not like America, which you have the so-called freedom of speech, right? You have a little bit more freedom than to preach than these other different countries, right? And that's how the Lord created it. All right, in order for this gospel to be preached, okay. But you got certain guys who's in it for ulterior motives to be seen. Oh, they're doing the work of the Lord. They're going to all these different countries in which is really unwise, man. All right. Luke 14:23, and the Lord said unto the servant, O Salakia. Matthew 10:14. There we go. And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when ye depart out of that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. All right. So if you got a problem at a certain location that you're preaching at, and you're supposed to shake the dust off of your feet, and preach elsewhere, man. All right, we're not there to fight, cause conflict. All right, get in, certain situations. All right, we're there to, preach the word and, go home. Okay, make things simple. But you got, a lot of people who just, ultimately doing too much. All right. So I'll read the last scripture. This is Matthew 10:16. It says, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpent and harmless as doves. You see? And that's the whole point, You got to use wisdom when you're out there. All right? When as soon as he said, to go, to leave, you're to leave. All right? That's not wise. That's not something that, Yahweh Shah would have done. All right? Which we reading it, in the book of Matthew, what you're supposed to do in those type of situations. All right, which these are the words of Yahweh Shai, right? Agree with thine adversary quickly. That's the words of Yahweh Shai. Okay, but that's pretty much the point. All right, so with that, I like to give all the honor, praise, and glory unto Yahweh by Hashem, Yahweh Shai by Hashem, or Hakot, or Hakdash.